Welcome to the Explainer. Look, we're just going to dive straight into this one today because we are looking at a political landscape that is shifting incredibly fast. They always say a week is a long time in politics, but honestly, it seems like a prime minister's political honeymoon these days is actually shorter than a celebrity marriage. The source material we're digging into today paints a really vivid picture of a newly minted prime minister, Andy Burnham, discovering that his trademark regional leadership style is immediately colliding with just an absolute barrage of defining national challenges. Which brings us to the big framing question right off the bat, as highlighted by some recent Sky News analysis. Is Andy Burnham's political honeymoon already over? Because as soon as you cross the threshold of number 10, the reality of governing hits you like a freight train. There's no longer the luxury of just opposing the other side. You actually have to deliver. And the sources show us that the sheer volume of immediate, massive pressures on this new administration is testing whether that initial voter goodwill has already completely evaporated. So what are we looking at today? Well, we've got massive early tests for the prime minister, specifically focusing on prisons, taxes, and foreign policy. Let's start right off with the early release crisis. Now, this is a severe inherited problem. On one hand, you have this very neutral operational reality, right? The probation union and various experts note that there is simply no space left in the system. The early release policy is basically just a mechanical lever being pulled to prevent a total system collapse. But on the other hand, we see the intensely politically charged reality of that decision. The Sun is arguing that Britain has had enough of soft justice, and Sky News is reporting on this fierce outcry from victims' families, who are calling it a kick in the teeth. We aren't taking sides here, obviously, but it is absolutely vital to see how a logistical policy decision instantly becomes this fierce emotional and political battleground. The Times actually sums this up perfectly. They wrote, "There's no early release from Burnham's first big test." The commentary from the sources points out that Burnham is attempting to succeed where his predecessors failed, by actually trying to take the voters with him on this journey. He's out there communicating why this really uncomfortable step is necessary, rather than just quietly trying to push it through. And, this is a hallmark of his regional consensus-building leadership style, but we're seeing it severely tested on a much more hostile national stage. It's an absolute high-wire act of public relations and crisis management. Next up, we have taxes and the cost of living. Zero. That is the baseline for the current debate around wealth right now. The sources point to these growing calls for the prime minister to resist what some are describing as the confiscation of unearned wealth. But what does unearned wealth actually mean in plain English? Essentially, this refers to wealth that's generated not from a daily wage or a salary, but from assets. So things like property appreciation, inheritances, or investments. The debate is at absolute zero tolerance for some commentators who argue that going after this wealth is deeply unfair to those who have saved and invested over their lifetimes. Yet, the PM is getting fiercely conflicting demands on this. While some sources are saying protect unearned wealth, other reports reveal highly targeted calls urging Burnham to raise income tax specifically to help save and support the self-employed sector. This puts the prime minister in an absolute vice. I mean, think about it. Do you tax day-to-day earnings, the income tax, which hits working people immediately, or do you look at wealth taxes, which triggers this intense pushback from asset owners? This directly pits regional workers against what are often London-centric asset owners. It's a fundamental test of labor's economic identity and Burnham's whole commitment to regional equality. Moving right along to the homelessness pledge. Burnham has made these very ambitious regional and social pledges, prominently featuring a major promise to end rough sleeping. But when Sky News went out and spoke directly to rough sleepers about the PM's pledge, they offered this incredibly arresting direct quote: "Homelessness isn't the issue." Sounds completely counterintuitive, right? It just instantly grounds all of that soaring political rhetoric. So the crucial point here is the translation gap. The sources show that the people actually out on the street are outlining practical, immediate needs. We're talking specialized mental health interventions, addiction services, personal safety that go far, far beyond just putting a roof over someone's head to satisfy a political target. It brilliantly illustrates the divide between a polished political pledge made in Westminster and the complex, messy, practical reality required to actually solve the problem. It is a direct clash between his old mayoral style of local, hands-on action and the rigid realities of national bureaucracy. Now, let's talk about the Makerfield pest. Here is the plain English translation of that political buzzword. Makerfield is a constituency in the Greater Manchester area. And this test, it's a standard for evaluating foreign policy based on a very simple local analogy. How does this massive global decision directly impact the everyday lives of people living in regional, domestic communities like Makerfield? It's an attempt to link the high-level geopolitics of the world stage directly back to the kitchen table of the British voter.
This is arguably the ultimate embodiment of Burnham's regional focus, applied directly to his newfound national power. And we are actually seeing this Makerfield test applied immediately. The Guardian reports that Burnham is being urged to tackle the domestic cost of living crisis by getting involved on the global stage, specifically by pressuring Donald Trump to end the war in Iran. The logic here is that global conflicts drive up oil prices and inflation, which directly hits the wallets of folks in those regional communities. So the PM is under massive pressure to stand up on the world stage not just for diplomacy's sake, but to fix domestic economic woes right at home.
Finally, we have Labor's future leadership. As anyone who follows the ruthless world of politics knows, literally the second you win the top job, people start talking about who is going to replace you. We are already seeing quiet discussions and internal party rumblings about succession. But more surprisingly, The Guardian reports that Labor ministers are having to actively go on record to deny that Burnham's leadership style is too blokey. It's a remarkably specific defense of his personality. It shows how his specific regional, everyman persona, that northern mayoral charm that arguably got him the job in the first place, is constantly being scrutinized and managed by some in Westminster who are already taking aim at it. Which naturally leads to this final, highly provocative thought straight from Sky News. Amidst all this talk of leadership styles, massive early tests, and succession rumblings, this question is suddenly making headlines again. Why has Labor never had a woman leader? As PM Burnham figures out if his regional playbook can survive these massive national tests across prisons, taxes, and global diplomacy, the shadow of his eventual successor is already looming. It is a fascinating look at how the present and the future of politics collide. So what do you think this means for the future direction of the party? Let that question simmer, and we will see you in the next explainer.